think we now have Errol Musk, father of Elon Musk, joining us from South Africa. Mr. Musk, lovely to speak to you. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Tell us, I suppose, the key question, and I know you've been asked it time and time again. What was Elon like as a child?
No, he was a very good child. No problems at all. Very ideal child. You know, he had a problem talking. He was sometimes a bit rude to adults because he would often say to people who questioned him reading a thick book or something, are you reading that? Are you actually reading that, little boy? And he'd say to the adults, what are you, stupid or something? Of course I'm reading it.
All right, so I'm sensing some precociousness.
Pardon?
I'm sensing some precociousness from an early age.
Yeah, I suppose you could call it that. But I had to speak to him afterwards on a few occasions, you know, say to him, look, you can't talk like that to people, you know. And he said, but they're stupid. I said, yes, but you can't talk. They may well be, but you can't talk to them like that. You have to be nice, you know. So I taught him to try and be nice.
And what do you think is his sort of finest achievement to date? Is it the setting up of Tesla? Is it his involvement with X? Is it firing rockets into the sky and apparently planning a mission to Mars, we read in our papers this morning?
Well, I'd say, you know, nearly all the things he's done are quite extraordinary. You know, if you go back to PayPal, if you go back to Zip2, putting the newspapers on the internet, then PayPal, which is now more than 60% of all transactions in the internet go through PayPal. And, you know, and you look at Tesla and so on. So it's very difficult to say this is better than that. But I am very pleased with his, you know, 50% of life is politics. And most people don't realize that. They think that their world of wherever they work, whatever job they do, that's the world for them. In fact, politics is half of your entire existence. It controls half your life. And I'm so glad that he's now not just ignoring the political side and that he's actually looking at the political side as well, which of course is what is the leadership element in life, among people, among the nations. And so, yes, I'd say I'm very glad that he's done full circle now. It's not just a half circle that people sometimes live in, just their own business, just their own families, just their own this. He's now gone full circle and he's including the political realm as well. And I think that's very important.
Well, Donald Trump has appointed him as the head of an agency that is going to be dedicated to cutting waste in the next Trump administration. I mean, is he going to have time for that, Errol? This is a busy, busy man. How much time can he commit to that project?
Yes, well, you know, there's no way he can go in with a briefcase and sit behind a desk or anything like that. And of course, the first thought I had was, how on earth are you going to do this? Because his life is already compartmentalized into a few minutes every day for an item. And most of the time he's in the air doing business from the air. And he spends about one night at home. So he didn't even have a need to have a home anymore. So it is a problem. It's a really big problem. But I just go back to the old saying, you know, if you want something done, give it to the most occupied, most busy person. And that's when you'll get it done.
No, fair enough.
Go to the one who has no time.
Is he planning a mission to Mars? That's what the Sunday papers in the UK are speculating.
That he will go to Mars?
Yeah.
In due course. Well, yes, of course. I mean, that's the whole point. I mean,
yeah.
I would imagine we should be able to land something on Mars within the next 24 months. You know, we now have a government in America that will be more sympathetic to the problem. And they will be able to do more testing of the Starship. But there's no doubt whatsoever that within the next 24 months, we will land something on Mars.
Very exciting.
You know, and yes, no doubt about that.
And tell me one more thing. You've said about our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, that he must resign because he's sending England back to the Tudor times. And you've called him you've accused him of heading up a totally fascist government. Keir Starmer, a fascist. Is that quite right, Mr. Musk?
Well, you know, what is fascism? Fascism is a high school. So you go to a typical high school, and that's a fascistic setup. All authority is in the hands of the principal, and the second level of authority are the teachers. The pupils, they just sit up straight. If they open their mouths, in my country, they got caned. And that essentially, they have no say. that is essentially what a fascistic setup is about. Doesn't mean it's bad or anything, and it obviously works well in high schools. The trouble is that in the world at large, the kind of rules that Mr. Starmer has been putting down and laying down and putting people in prison for
Mr. Musk,
posting
we need
things.
to leave it
It's not
there,
right.
I'm afraid. It's not right. Mr. Musk, we need to leave it there just because we were a bit late to this interview. But thank you very much indeed for joining me. I'm back next week at 9:30.
I used to have to use the razor that my ex-girlfriend used to shave her legs. It scratched me and it made me feel weird. But fear not, because Manscaped is back with a game changer. This isn't just any old shaver. We're talking about the Chairman Pro Electric Foil Shaver with 2 interchangeable skin-safe blade heads. One for that baby smooth look and another when you want to keep it a bit rugged. Get this, it's waterproof. You can use it in the shower, by the pool, or even while scuba diving if that's your thing. This beauty runs for 75 minutes on a single charge. That's enough time to shave your face, your mate's face, and still have juice left over for touch-ups. You'll also get their Power Shave Gel for a proper wet shave experience, and a face shave soother to keep your mug looking fresh and irritation-free. It's like having a barber in your bathroom, minus the awkward small talk. Click the link in the description and use the code GBN for a whopping 20% off and free shipping with the code GBN at manscaped.com. Join the 11 million blokes worldwide who trust Manscaped. Your face will thank you, and so will your wallet.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show, only on GB News. Joining me now is the former head of MI6, Sir Richard Dearlove. Lovely to see you this morning, Sir Richard. Thank you very much indeed for your time. We'll get on to Russia in just a moment, but can we talk about this ICC arrest warrant? Joe Biden, the US president, has called the ruling outrageous and pledged to always stand with Israel against threats to its security. Senator Lindsey Graham, who's a Republican, has said to any ally, Canada, Britain, Germany, France, if you try to help the ICC, we're going to sanction you. We should crush your economy. Do we think the UK government should be siding with the ICC or with Benjamin Netanyahu?
I think in this particular instance, there's no question we have to side with the Israelis. Look, the situation is extraordinary. In a war, you try to protect your civilian populations. Hamas's strategy is to make sure that the maximum number of Palestinians are killed. It's going completely reverse to what one would expect. It's actually got massive underground tunnels under Gaza. It could protect the civilian population by putting them in its own air raid shelters. Does it allow the Palestinians to go into the tunnels? Absolutely, it doesn't. There's no question that the whole thing is a setup, as it were, to propagandize the conflict and to make Israel look like, the extremists. I mean, Israel are fighting a war of survival. And I mean, what this means is that the ICC would condemn any leader in a nation that's fighting a war of survival. I mean, I think it is a black and white situation. It's confused by the level of humanitarian suffering, which is dreadful. But on the other hand, this is what Hamas is trying to do.
Do you think that there's a sense to which some people in the Western world have completely underestimated what Hamas are and the threat they pose, not just to Israel, but actually the rest of the world, not least with their Iranian backing? There's this sense to which it seems as if Hamas has won at least the propaganda war online. Do people actually have any comprehension at all of just how barbaric and brutal these people are?
No, I don't think they do. And I think this is what's so catastrophic. I mean, the Iranian theocracy, through its Praetorian Guard, the IRGC, has, as it were, prepared the ground over years with Hezbollah, with Hamas in particular, to an extent with the Houthi as well. And I think when you see these demonstrations in sympathy with the Palestinians, that I understand. But support for Hamas and support for Hezbollah means that people just do not understand the reality of the situation. These are ruthless, bloody terrorist organizations.
Should Home Secretary Yvette Cooper be being far less ambivalent about this? Should she just come out and say, no, we're not going to abide by any ICC arrest warrant because Israel is a democratic nation?
Well, she certainly should. But having heard her interviewed on the Today programme earlier in the week, she clearly hadn't a clue what to say. She ducked and weaved. I mean, it was the most extraordinary. She just blared her way through the interview without really saying anything. I mean, it shows that they're in a very tough position, but they need to take a clear stand on this.
But that's really worrying. I mean, you're a former head of MI6. Aren't you quite worried that the Home Secretary, quotes, doesn't know what to say in an interview?
Look, I'm deeply worried about aspects of this new government, particularly when it comes to national security. And these are ultimately issues of national security.
Well, develop that thought. What worries you most?
Well, I think what I'm really concerned about is the defense budget. We're in a state of international crisis. Okay, we have a defense review, but there's no urgency at all on the government's part. We've just seen them cut various military equipment to make a saving. Okay, they're saying it's outdated, but you don't do that when you are threatened by probably the worst security situation in Europe. Look, for someone like me, I mean, this may upset a lot of people. This is as important, perhaps more important than the National Health Service. It should be absolutely at the top of the government's priorities, and it isn't. And I mean, this also bleeds into our energy policy, and because that's a vital part of national security. And you've got Ed Miliband following a completely crazy energy policy. I mean, mad energy policy.
What are you saying, that you think it plays into the Russians in many respects and the Chinese?
Well,
what are you saying about that, Sir Richard?
We have our own energy resources. We need to develop our independence. We should, I'm afraid, be thinking about things like fracking. We should be thinking about, how we're going to maintain cheap energy supplies for ourselves on the basis of the resources that we own and control. Look, this is a complicated issue, but I think we need to be pretty clear-cut and simple about it.
Let's try and be clear-cut and simple about Vladimir Putin. Should we be more worried about hypersonic missiles, or should we be more worried about cybersecurity and attacks on our key infrastructure?
Well, I think Putin's got a problem. He can escalate the war verbally, which he does, but then to escalate it in terms of conflict is a more complicated issue. I think he wants to avoid a shooting war with the West, but he's prepared to make these demonstrations of Russian armaments and Russian armaments technology. But in reality, I think what we're facing already, we're in a state of hybrid conflict with Russia. So there are many things that he's going to do to us without really much restraint. We've already been warned by the heads of the security service and the intelligence service about Russian sabotage and the Russians going feral in this area. We've seen cables being cut internationally. We've seen problems with critical infrastructure. We have seen cyber-related, you probably know my personal emails have been hacked by the Russians several times, and that's caused quite a lot of publicity. I'm very flattered that they still want to hack my emails, but it shows the extent of the lengths that they're prepared to go to. And then there's the whole area of information warfare, cognitive warfare, in which the Russians are highly skilled. So all of these things are going to escalate. I don't think Russia is going to risk personally a shooting war with the West. If they can't cope with the Ukrainian military, if they can't win in Ukraine, they're not going to take on NATO. But we're already in a state of conflict in all these other areas. And, the Marxist doctrine to which Putin still subscribes is that all of these areas are areas of conflict. The military is just one dimension.
How worried were you when we discovered that North Korean troops were being sent to Ukraine? I mean, it just kind of conjures up, I think, this resurgence of the idea of an axis of evil being formed.
Yeah, I think that we have to see that that's a real issue. Iran, Russia, China, North Korea working together. I'm actually skeptical about the value of North Korean troops to the Russian military. It seems to me that this is almost a symbolic move. And I was recently at a security conference in Central Europe last week, at which Ukrainians were present. And I think they agreed with me that the integration of North Korean soldiers into the Russian military is not a straightforward issue. And how effective are they going to be on the battlefield? These people have been completely isolated. They're part of an autistic regime. They've never been outside North Korea. They don't really know anything about the outside world. Are they going to defect? You know, how are they going to behave on the battlefield when they face a really fierce, battle-hardened Ukrainian military? I mean, for me, this is more of a symbolic gesture than a military gesture.
What are your thoughts about the re-election as US President of Donald Trump? Do you think that ultimately will make the world a safer place or more dangerous when you consider some of his rhetoric, particularly around Ukraine and Russia?
We don't know is the answer. With regard to China, Biden followed the policy that Trump established in his first administration. I have to admit, I'm worried about Trump in relation to Ukraine, but talking to other members of his administration, I've certainly done podcasts with Rubio, who's now his Secretary of State. I mean, Rubio makes the point very clearly that Trump is not going to start his administration with a disaster in Ukraine like Biden had in Afghanistan. I mean, this dogged Biden for the whole of his administration. So I think it's important to sort of leave the book open and consider where we stand. I mean, the irony is, if you take the UK on its own, I mean, Trump has a much better disposition towards the UK than Biden ever had. I mean, the first thing that Biden did when he came into it was to suspend trade negotiations, which never returned. Biden looks on this country with much more friendship Trump looks on this country with much friendship with Biden does. So, you know, I mean, look, there's uncertainty. We don't have all the answers, and I'm worried about some of the people he's trying to appoint. But I think, you know, this will clarify over time. And he's the democratically elected president of the United States with a clear mandate. The special relationship thrived under his previous administration, so there's no reason to panic at this stage.
Although he probably won't have the best relationship with David Lammy, the foreign secretary, who has been hugely critical of Trump.
Oh, lots of people have been critical about Trump. And let's face it, when foreign secretaries go to Washington, and I know this in my own experience, they don't necessarily see the president. And I'm not sure, you know, Lammy is going to be best friends with him. I mean, other people do. And there'll be other people who'll be interlocutors with Trump. And anyway, look, Vance was pretty rude about Trump in his previous political life. But, you know, Lammy has got a lot of baggage, and, yeah, he's not the ideal person. But he won't be, he'll be part of the special relationship, but in my guess, he won't be a particularly important part of it.
I know, but I am intrigued, Sir Richard, because you've expressed concerns now about the Home Secretary and the Foreign Secretary, two key politicians representing Great Britain on the world stage. Well, look at their record since they came into office. You know, they had everything going for them, and they've just made a series of extraordinary mistakes. My other question is, why on earth is the Prime Minister jumping off aeroplanes all the time? He's got domestic problems to deal with. When Margaret Thatcher came into office, first of all, she refused to travel overseas. She was criticised for it, but it was exactly the right thing to do. She focused on the domestic agenda. The Prime Minister doesn't need to be running around the world in this crazy fashion. How many trips has he made since he came into power? This is ridiculous. Well, I don't know. All I know is he's been nicknamed Never Hear Keir. Sir Richard Dearlove, thank you very much for your candour this morning. Great to speak to you, albeit rather troubling times ahead, I think, for the West. Thank you.